So welcome everyone to the Ecopsychology Café, a virtual gathering, monthly gathering that for people interested in ecopsychology and ecotherapy. Hello, my name is Carol Cozio, and I am the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the host of this series. Monica Dragoza and I co-created this program. Today, Monica is going to introduce our guest speaker. Monica, take it away.
Thanks, Carol. I'm Monica Dragos, and today I'm sitting where I live is Treaty 7 territory in Calgary, Alberta. And Treaty 7 territory is the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda Nation, and is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And Calgary, or Mohkinstsis, as it is referred to in Blackfoot, sits at the confluence of the Elbow and the Bow rivers. And this part of the world typically gets a lot of winter sun, and today is no exception. It's kind of a beautiful, sunny, late winter day. And today we have Jackie Seidel with us. And Jackie is an associate professor in the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary. And her scholarship focuses on exploring existential meanings of ecological and biodiversity loss for teaching, learning, and curriculum. Jackie will talk about how ecopsychology offers language and ways of conceptualizing well-being that break open dualistic and individualistic or ego-bound ways of thinking, ways that can support other more life-serving ways of imagining what schooling and the lives of children can be in these important times. So, Jackie, really happy to have you with us. Feel free to start.
Okay, thank you, Monica and Carol and everybody else for coming. I'm happy to see all of you. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I don't have slides or anything. I just prepared some notes to begin. That will probably take, I don't know, around, depends how fast I talk, 6 or 7 minutes. I'm not actually going to talk too much about ecopsychology, but more just about the current state of how I'm thinking about education. And then during our discussion, we can talk more about the eco-psychological implications for schools. So my discipline that I work in the university is called curriculum studies, which is a critical interdisciplinary study of the histories and purposes of curriculum and schooling. So that would include questions of power, what schooling is about and for, what curriculum is, and how children and their lives are imagined and conceptualized. And so, as Monica said, a lot of my scholarship has focused on how teachers existentially make sense of biodiversity and ecological crisis in relation to the work that we do in our classrooms with children. And one of the enduring themes for me has been how time is conceptualized and materialized and experienced in the entire educational project. And so this includes the time and timing, excuse me, of children's lives. And the question of time matters to me because as a teacher, I'm very aware, teaching student teachers as well, of the ways that existential time, so the lived phenomenological time that we're all in, experienced by our bodies and minds, is squeezed and diminished by the quantified, measured industrial timeline that we also all live inside. So this economic, measured, and linear chronological time is inherited from the Judeo-Christian heritage, and this places all of our expectations on the future, and that's a temporal condition under which teachers are laboring and children are learning in schools. Those of us in higher education are also working inside. And so this system, children's life value is positioned as future labor, and they're being inducted into habits and skills of being workers and consumers. So that means being compliant, being on time, being productive, and even commuting. So clock time is the commodified time that undergirds the ongoing legacies of industrialization, colonialism, white supremacy, and extractivism. And the near totalizing future focused frame of this linear time view of schooling, I think, really inhibits the imagining of other conceptualizations of time that might be more liberatory, relational, and life-serving, and in these precarious times, even life-saving. Ecopsychology broadly helps me think about and imagine more healing and healthy ways to be in the world for myself and for schools and with children and with the pre-service teachers I work with. And it matters because both the fields of education and psychology were developed and grew up together in the same time and out of the same historical and cultural situations. So basically the fossil fuel burning era that's got us in this terrible predicament that we're in now. And so my interest is in all of the eco-disciplines, including ecofeminism and the environmental humanities, is in the ways that they can support educators in thinking ourselves into more life-serving, as Andy Fisher would say, ways of being. So I'm going to end just with a little bit of a story here to summon up some images of schools in our mind, but I have a very keen interest about how education of the future is portrayed in science fiction and pop culture. So in TV, novels, and films, and there's like a lot of them. So apocalypse is in the air, yet rarely do any of these shows reflect the challenges that we actually face. And what I do notice is the ways that the character of schooling feels so damn familiar in these representations. So people are going through the apocalypse and schooling goes on. So my example that I want to share today is from the television series Star Trek Discovery. And they first aired an episode of their little short stories called Short Treks, called Children of Mars in January of 2020. And this short story features a school about 300 years in the future, where we might rightly anticipate that schools in 2060 would probably look quite different than now, especially in a speculative fictional universe. But no, the children wearing uniforms arrive by school bus, and they're divided by ages. They sit in discrete classrooms, in rows, in hard desks, all facing their tech devices with a teacher at the front of the class holding a position of absolute power and authority. And there's a generalized sense in the short story of purposelessness and restlessness, and the hallways are lined with lockers, and student relationships are characterized by bullying and violence. And there are motivational posters hanging on the walls with messages like grow and achieve. And luckily for those of us who love to read and browse physical archives, the school surprisingly has an actual library with actual books, which my institution barely has anymore. But the dominant view of time that shapes contemporary and maybe future and historical schools in this episode imagines time as linear and the clock is ticking, and this constantly urges us to hurry up, to be more productive, to never be late, even while we feel that time is constantly running out. And bells are ringing, days are divided into lessons and periods, and short scheduled breaks are allowed for playing or resting or eating or going to the bathroom or other bodily needs. And the fragmented subject disciplines are mandated to exact number of minutes to occupy during the school day or year. And then children get divided up into grade and age levels and even ability levels within their grades. And the ubiquitous routine report cards resemble financial quarterly reports. So then also words are spoken that strike fear into the hearts of parents, like falling behind or below grade level. And the refrain of learning loss or learning gaps has appeared prominently in Western societies during the current COVID-19 pandemic, reflecting a not so subtle settler colonial white privilege that continues to energize this enduring and totalizing image or timeline of curriculum in schools. So Star Trek takes place in galactic universe time, and yet the very creative and talented writers imagine schools in this reproductive, limited, and constrained manner. The Children of Mars episode ends horrifyingly with the children collectively witnessing, both on their handheld devices and then on the large screens in their school foyer and classrooms in real time, a violent attack that will leave them orphaned and homeless. An apocalyptic traumatic event that seems unthinkable while standing beside motivational posters telling them to achieve and to grow. But this does feel to me uncomfortably familiar with how schooling is right now in our time. And so no wonder children are joining around the world the youth climate strike movement and are begging for climate change curriculum, and they want to know how they will live into their future. So.
Thanks so much, Jackie.
Yes.
I want to work in a couple of questions that people had asked even in advance of our time together today. And so I think I'm going to adapt them a little bit, but I guess I'll just start with maybe a question of my own. I'm wondering, just with your focus even on time today and in what you just said, how you might envision or imagine a school day differently in the lives of today's children.
Yeah, so I would imagine it without all of those things I just listed. So I would abolish it, the whole thing. And the reason why it would have to be differently imagined would be getting rid of some of those structures of the hierarchies, the levels, the individualism, the dualism, the breaking things down always into small little bits. And also our school buildings aren't really set up for this, so that's quite difficult, I think, to work with the physical spaces sometimes of the places that we're in with children, because they're holding us in that imagined space that came out of the industrial worldview. But so I think that would be one of the most important questions would be to start with a physical space in and around the school, and to really think about how it's unconsciously affecting our actions and our movements. And yeah, so like, I don't think that it's all about changing what is in the curriculum, but curriculum is always interpretable, as we say in curriculum studies. And so that gets lived by the teacher's interpretation and with the children and what happens in those spaces. So I would imagine it being like much slower and than things are now, with far fewer divisions between subjects and between children, between teachers, between classrooms. And this is really not easy to do. And it would focus, I think, also less on what we would call the human, or the separation between the human and nature, which is like so easy in schools. I'm teaching right now at the university in a classroom that's like cinder block walls, no windows. Like, so I told the student teachers, like, this space is teaching them what they deserve as teachers. And that's the hidden curriculum of the school space, versus the business building. The new one has like this big, huge windows and a fireplace and comfy furniture. So I told them, well, that's teaching business students what they deserve for their future. And so the spaces are shaping us in unconscious and probably conscious ways to think about what we deserve, or what children deserve. And so, yeah, I would start there. And then also with the idea that that tumbles into the ways that we behave and act, and think about what learning and curriculum are there. But mostly I would just start with like, slow down, rest more, pay attention to our bodies, and then see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I think your response to that leads nicely into the questions that we were given by folks, like I said, coming in advance here. So one question was, how do we foster respect for the human body and the earth? And so, you know, I think you spoke to part of that, but I don't know if you have further thoughts, like from a curriculum point of view,
Yeah.
how that might happen.
Yeah, so I do, because when I think of our education programs, like, that's not a focus in our courses overall at the University of Calgary and teacher ed. Like, I mean, I know I see Polly's here, and for sure she focuses on that, and Bridget at U of Alberta. There are people, individual instructors that focus on this, but if I thought of all our course outlines across the classes, like, this isn't a learning objective in any of the courses, even for student teachers, right? They are like, even they are exhausted and sitting in hard desks and chairs and windowless classrooms. So how do we pay attention to what is happening to the body, or the bodies of children in the classroom, where they have to bring their own water into the space, where, you know, they don't get to eat if they're hungry. Sometimes there's been this like weird thing on Twitter recently of somebody complaining about children going to the bathroom when they don't really need to. And then a lot of people chimed in and said, well, maybe they just need to go for a walk. Like, you know, so I really appreciated those people's comments and pushback against like that children should be just sit down and listen to the teacher and do their work. And that implies, you know, that they're just a future worker. So I don't know if I answered that very well, but this is a really big concern to me, what happens to the human body in these spaces. Or then, you know, we just like allow children to run out the door like once or twice a day after they get rushed into putting on their boots and doing up their zippers, and, you know, and then they run outside, and then the bell rings and they have to run back inside. And I don't know, really. I think as a teacher, I promised myself, like, I last was teaching up until 2008 after I finished my PhD, before I came to the U of C, and I promised myself that I would do these things, that I would pay more attention and I would do more things even outside with children, or bring that into our school space. And I found it so challenging, even when I think about this all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And I am having like a bit of a light bulb moment, I think, where I'm recalling, really vaguely my own school days, but you've painted the picture really well, I think, of how schools and school systems like just indoctrinate little humans early into overriding their bodies, right? Like what it means to ignore your body. And so then we have a society of adults that don't know how to pay attention to or honor their bodies as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hidden curriculum of schools, right? Is to learn to ignore the body. And it's part of the dualism, right? That the mind is, or the brain, or whatever we want to call it, is like the primary way of being in the world, versus like that we do know the world through our senses and through our embodied experiences and relationships.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, for sure. And you just mentioned too something about taking kids outside, and someone had also asked, it sounds like maybe they want to know how your vision of education might differ from, say, the forest play programs that are more widely available now.
Yeah. Well, I'm not an expert in those programs, but I sure do love them. And we have a wonderful one here in Calgary, a few of them actually, but these programs, at least here in Canada or North America, are available to very few children and get like cast as like this alternative, right? And a certain kind of privilege is required usually for children to be in these programs. And so I don't know that what I hope for is very different from what those programs are. I just wish that there was more of that for all children, and that more places to play, more places to be outside, more places to have a free sense of being creative and inventing and being in community with each other. And so I think breaking down like these dualisms between like the inside and the outside of the school, or like what is nature, what is human, or even, like what is a teacher, an adult, and what is a child. So I think this is one of the really destructive things in our society and in schools. And that we imagine that there's something called childhood and something called adulthood that's like above childhood, and we're somehow different from it. And that so how do we break that down into a more relational, not, I don't, breaking is a kind of violent word, into a more relational space where children, adults are living together in a more kind of like mutual creativity of what the world can be, and learning with each other, not just like the teacher delivering something.
Mhm.
So I don't know, my vision's not very, the forest school vision is something I think really lovely, that children deserve this time to play and to be outside, and not extra to what they're doing in school. Like now's the time to go outside, and now's the time to sit in our desks, but a more of an exploratory space where the world is also alive, right? And that we have kinship with animals and trees and the sky. And it's very difficult for those of us that grew up, as you say, Monica, in this system, to even like imagine this for ourselves before the panic sets in, and we think, well, how are they going to get a job, and how are they going to go to university, and are they going to get, like, right away all those questions come up, right? It shows the institutionalized power.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Carol, why don't we open it up to the larger group for questions and discussion?
Okay, before we do that, maybe Jackie, can you kind of just share with us your new course that you were hoping to run?
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned it in the bio, but yeah, so we have a new graduate certificate here in our faculty called Contemplative Ecological Education, which would have a pretty big focus on the eco disciplines, including ecopsychology. So it's a 4-course graduate certificate that can be standalone. So for people who already have graduate degrees or just want some professional development or to build community. or it can be part of our interdisciplinary MEd program as one of 3 certificates that people can build together to equal an MEd. So lots of people do them both ways. And so it has 2 classes in person over 2 weeks full-time in July, and then 1 online in the fall and 1 in the winter, a capstone project where people can design, implement their own project, whether that's like just, you know, resting and reading and studying, going for walks, or it could be actually like in someone's work of like trying to try out some of the ideas that we've been learning and studying about together. And the 2 courses in the summer are kind of a combination between theory and experience and practice. So a combination of reading, but also doing like a lot of things to try to experience what it is that we're thinking about and studying about for ourselves, like in our own body and in our own community that's developing. So we hope it will run. The deadline's in 2 weeks, but some of us are asking for it to be a bit softer deadline this year because we know some people need more time for applying to all of our programs. So I don't really know what else to say about it, or if anybody has any questions. We've had a surprising amount of interest from psychologists and social workers, and less from teachers. So that I didn't really anticipate that when my colleague Janet and I designed this, and it's taken us a few years to get it through and passed. So that what happens in the courses would depend really on who applies. And once we see people's statements of interest and background, then we really would know more about how to shape the program.
Super. Thank you so much, Jackie and Monica. I'll end the recording now.